In December 1931, as winter settled over New York City, the signs of the Great Depression were everywhere. Breadlines stretched for blocks, men in worn coats waited silently in the cold, and church kitchens struggled to feed the endless crowds of unemployed workers. Factories had closed, wages had vanished, and hunger had become part of the city's rhythm. In this atmosphere of hardship, Bernarr Macfadden, a publisher and health reformer known for his advocacy of physical culture and self-reliance, decided to act. He opened a cafeteria at 511 3rd Avenue, between 34th and 35th Streets, and called it Penny Cafeteria. Above the door, a simple sign invited anyone with a single coin to come inside. There were no long lines, no sermons, and no need to prove poverty. Inside stood rows of plain tables, metal trays, and the smell of bean soup simmering on the stove. For 1 cent, a person could buy a meal and, more importantly, preserve a sense of self-respect. The cafeteria was not charity but a practical experiment in self-help during a national emergency, designed to keep the hungry as participants rather than dependents. When the first day ended, the counters were nearly empty, and word began to spread that in a city of despair there was still a place where a penny could buy not just food but dignity. By the end of 1931, New York City had fallen into exhaustion. The stock market crash of 1929 had long passed, but its effects deepened each month. More than 1 million residents were out of work. Construction sites stood silent, ships idled in the harbor, and former clerks, porters, and laborers wandered in search of food or shelter. In tenement districts, families built shacks from discarded lumber and tar paper. Along the Bowery, long lines of men waited in the cold for bowls of thin soup that often ran out before everyone was served. These meals kept people alive but stripped them of pride. For many who had once lived securely, the act of standing in line for food carried the weight of defeat. Newspapers described such scenes as the most visible wound of the Depression, a portrait of a nation unsure of its own future. City leaders and philanthropists searched for ways to provide relief without humiliation, yet official programs moved slowly, constrained by bureaucracy and fear of dependency. As the winter deepened, hunger came to symbolize more than the absence of food. It marked a wider loss of control, a quiet despair that touched every social class. From this tension emerged the search for new solutions, efforts that aimed to restore not only sustenance but the dignity that poverty had taken away. Bernarr Macfadden was born in 1869 in Mill Spring, Missouri, and rose from poverty to become one of the most influential publishers in early 20th century America. By the 1920s he was known nationwide as the founder of Physical Culture magazine, a publication that promoted exercise, vegetarianism, and what he called natural living. His publishing empire grew to include popular titles such as True Story and Liberty, reaching millions of readers each month. Macfadden believed that physical strength and personal discipline were essential to moral health. He viewed vitality as both a private responsibility and a civic virtue. When the Great Depression struck, the crisis challenged the very ideals he had built his career upon. Many of his readers lost their jobs and homes, and the concept of self-reliance that had once defined his philosophy now collided with the reality of mass unemployment. Instead of withdrawing into business or politics, Macfadden chose to act. Using his fortune and publishing network, he directed his attention toward projects that combined practicality with compassion. Through his foundation, he launched several social initiatives designed to promote recovery through self-respect. The most ambitious of these was a series of low-cost cafeterias capable of feeding thousands at minimal prices. He named them 1-cent restaurants, or Penny Cafeterias. Each meal carried the same message that had long guided his work: even in hardship, people deserved the chance to participate rather than depend. For Macfadden, the penny meal was not an act of charity but an affirmation that human dignity could endure when given structure, order, and a fair exchange. In the final months of 1931, New York was gripped by hunger and uncertainty. Lines for free soup kitchens wound around entire city blocks, and reports of malnutrition appeared almost daily in the newspapers. Amid this atmosphere of desperation, Bernarr Macfadden decided to bring to life an idea he had been shaping for months. He believed that even the poorest citizen should have the right to pay for food, however small the price, and that this simple act could preserve a person's dignity. Using funds from his foundation, he rented a modest building at the same location in Manhattan where he had established his offices and prepared it to serve meals on an unprecedented scale. The concept was straightforward. Instead of giving food away for free as most relief kitchens did, each visitor would pay a nominal price, sometimes as little as 1 cent per item. When the doors opened in December 1931, the project immediately drew public attention. Inside were rows of clean tables, plain dishes, and the smell of vegetable soup that cost less than a newspaper. Local journalists described the experiment as a rare combination of efficiency and empathy. Civic organizations and church leaders praised it as a model of practical compassion, one that allowed people to eat without humiliation and kept the operation financially sound. In a city overwhelmed by need, Macfadden's Cafeteria stood out as a bridge between charity and commerce, proving that even in economic collapse a penny could still represent human worth. Inside the Penny Cafeteria everything was organized with precision and simplicity. The menu offered plain, nourishing food that could be prepared in large quantities and served quickly. Visitors chose from vegetable or bean soups, oatmeal or rice porridge, slices of whole wheat bread, and a cup of coffee or cocoa. Each portion cost 1 or 2 cents, while a full meal seldom exceeded 10. The cafeteria operated entirely on a self-service model. Customers took trays, moved along the counter, and paid at the end, which eliminated the need for waiters and kept costs low. Macfadden's foundation purchased ingredients in bulk from nearby wholesalers and markets, and sympathetic suppliers often donated surplus produce that would otherwise have gone to waste. The kitchen staff worked long hours to maintain steady service and consistent portions throughout the day. Despite its modest setting, the cafeteria ran with the efficiency of a commercial restaurant. Lines formed outside before opening, and by midday every seat was taken. Newspapers reported that around 3,000 people were served daily, a figure that reflected both the scale of the city's hunger and the project's success. For many, the Penny Cafeteria became part of their daily rhythm, a place where they could eat decently, pay a fair price, and regain a sense of participation rather than dependence. It was a system built not on charity but on organization and respect for the most basic human need, a meal that could still be earned. The growing success of the Penny Cafeteria inevitably drew criticism. Some restaurant owners claimed that its extremely low prices distorted the city's food economy, arguing that no ordinary establishment could match such affordability. Others questioned Macfadden's motives, suggesting that the project might simply promote his publishing empire. City officials, wary of any large-scale feeding operation, launched a series of inspections to assess its operations. The findings confirmed that the cafeteria met municipal requirements and operated efficiently. Instead of defending himself through rhetoric, Macfadden chose transparency. In Physical Culture and other journals he published detailed reports on costs and procedures, showing how bulk purchasing, simple menus, and minimal staffing made the enterprise sustainable without profit or exploitation. The data impressed both supporters and skeptics. For the public it was a rare glimpse into the financial workings of a Depression-era relief effort that combined private initiative with civic responsibility. Rather than weakening the project, the scrutiny strengthened its reputation. Observers began to see the Penny Cafeteria not as a threat to business but as an experiment in organization and integrity. For Macfadden, the experience confirmed that structure and honesty could achieve what sentiment alone could not. In a city accustomed to failed charities and broken promises, his cafeteria proved that efficiency could coexist with compassion. By 1932, the idea that had begun in a single building on 3rd Avenue had grown into a small network of cafeterias across New York City. The foundation managed several locations, each operating with the same principle of minimal pricing and self-service. Newspaper accounts described long but orderly lines and noted that the Penny Cafeterias offered a rare sense of dignity compared with the crowded and often chaotic soup kitchens. Their success eased the strain on city relief programs, which struggled to meet demand. Local papers, including the New York Evening Post and the New York Times, praised the experiment for its balance of efficiency and compassion, and civic leaders took note of how the model might be applied elsewhere. Within a year, similar low-cost cafeterias appeared in other cities such as Chicago, Cleveland, and St. Louis, adapting Macfadden's concept to local conditions. The movement appealed to communities searching for practical ways to confront urban hunger without fostering dependency. Beyond immediate relief, it also entered public discussion about the role of private enterprise and social welfare. Macfadden's cafeterias demonstrated that a low-cost food service could remain self-sustaining while preserving health standards and human respect. In an era when most relief programs were short-lived and uncertain, they stood out as an example of stability. To many observers of the Depression, they offered a glimpse of how an organized society could feed its citizens without abandoning its values. As the American economy began to recover in the late 1930s, the need for emergency feeding programs declined. Employment rose, wages stabilized, and the long lines outside charity kitchens grew shorter. In this changing environment, the Penny Cafeterias gradually closed, their mission fulfilled as the worst years of the Depression passed. Yet their influence outlived them. Historians of social welfare and food culture later recognized Macfadden's project as one of the earliest examples of social enterprise, an attempt to combine economic discipline with humanitarian purpose. The cafeterias demonstrated that private initiative could complement public relief without fostering dependency. Their structure anticipated later models of community food service, including cooperative cafeterias and flexible pricing systems that allowed people to contribute what they could. Elements of their philosophy also surfaced in post-war school lunch programs and municipal efforts that sought to link nourishment with self-respect. Although the original buildings were gone, the idea they embodied persisted in civic memory and academic study. For historians, the Penny Cafeterias remained a symbol of balance, proof that compassion could coexist with efficiency, and that even within a market economy fairness could be a guiding principle rather than an exception. The story of Bernarr Macfadden showed that humanitarian action did not require grand gestures or political movements. It could emerge from order, discipline, and practical compassion. His Penny Cafeterias did not eliminate hunger in New York, but they transformed how it was perceived. In a period when poverty was seen as a personal failure, his approach restored the link between necessity and dignity. By attaching even the smallest price to a meal, he turned eating from an act of desperation into a shared human experience. Each transaction affirmed that those in need were still participants in society, not its outcasts. The idea carried a quiet moral clarity, suggesting that empathy and efficiency could coexist when guided by respect rather than pity. Long after the cafeterias disappeared, their example continued to challenge the assumption that compassion and structure must belong to separate worlds. Macfadden's legacy was not measured by the number of meals served but by the principle behind them, the belief that human worth could be preserved through fairness and design. In an age when the value of life was counted in dollars, he measured it in the cost of a bowl of soup and a piece of bread. His experiment proved that even in the depths of economic despair, a single coin could still stand for both sustenance and self-respect.